If you're finding the metagame a little bit stale, we got your back. Today we're going to be going over some hidden gems that definitely deserve your attention in the right context. First up for discussion is Doomfist. There's a few principles of the metagame right now that a lot of team comps operate under. There's a lot of close range brawl and high burst damage. And with that kind of being the rule set of how the game works right now, Doomfist fits in quite well. Not only is he durable enough to not instantly die to Brigitte, which is a feat that not a lot of DPS characters can boast right now, he also has the potential to have insane burst damage that doesn't really care about armor or brawl or healing if you're able to land his abilities. In previous metas, the game was a bit faster, so all of this firepower that Doomfist brought to the table was kind of overkill and not really worth it, as Tracer and Genji had so much mobility and enough damage to be able to be the meta-defining picks. Right now, the game's a bit slower. Often we say MOBA-esque, cooldown-based. A lot more of the fights are won with the Reinhardt positioning, landing big cooldowns, things like that. It's a slower game, and because of that, Doomfist has the ability to keep getting his cooldowns back a few times in a fight, rather than a fight being over at the break of it in the first few seconds when a dive comes through. A lot of damage characters right now can feel useless in comparison to the amount of healing, but also in comparison to the burst damage that Hanzo can put out. Doomfist is a fair duel against Hanzo, but whether he duels him or not, he has the firepower to be able to match the big damage that Hanzo is bringing, in comparison to other characters that I don't think are very strong right now, like for example, Soldier, at least not in the DPS slot. Maybe as a 3 DPS he can work. Soldier's just a little bit too slow in the way he deals his damage to have a good impact right now. Doomfist is like the opposite of that, where his abilities land fast and furious and can punish quite severely a lot of the close range fighting that goes on. Next up is Tracer. What? Tracer? In the Brigitte meta? Are you crazy? Okay, hear me out. The pros have been playing Brigitte too, and I'll get to that in a second, but in matchmaking, I think people forget it isn't good enough at all to have like half of the meta comp. As soon as you have 1 or 2 picks incorrect that don't synergize to create the strongest composition, all of a sudden you're exploitable to all sorts of things, and the win conditions change completely. If either you see your enemy not running a Brigitte, or if the Brigitte is one of the supports not in the damage slot, Tracer can look quite strong. Why? Well, Brigitte is just a glorified Mccree. Tracers have been dodging Mccree's flashbang forever. The bigger problem that Tracers have against the triple support, let's be honest, Brigitte's in the DPS slot type team comps, is that there's too much healing for Tracer to harass meaningfully and whittle something down. But if they have anybody split up at all, or you can draw attention towards the backside of the fight and dodge the Brigitte stun, Tracer can look as powerful as ever. But the thing that stops her from being meta is when you start to get into a counter-picking game, which often can be harmful to you, of course, because if, let's say, you attack with Tracer successfully, now you have to defend the point, well, they go Brigitte, now you're going to be looking a lot weaker. But if it's just Brigitte as one of the supports, you can harass the back and do more damage than she can heal, and that just kind of goes in general. Brigitte is not good as one of the 2 supports, and makes damage characters look way better than they should be in the meta right now. Remember, Tracer was one of the best heroes of all time for a really long time, and the basic skill sets of what she does, surviving forever in the backline, setting up pincer attacks that the enemy can't see coming, a lot of that can still be used, even sometimes when the Brigitte is in play, as long as the Tracer plays good enough to dodge those stuns. And the mid fight really isn't my biggest concern. It more so comes down to the ult fight, when that rally comes into play. Then if you don't have ultimates to kill them, well, you're just gonna lose to the rally armor. But it has been nerfed on live, and Tracer is still seeing some play in the Overwatch League, and they have a stronger Brigitte than we do. It mainly comes down to this. Tracer's a character that just commands space like few other characters in the game can. She can go off on her own on super mad flanks to pick out whatever target she wants, and although range damage generally is stronger and more easy to execute in the meta right now, the mobility of Tracer can still be used to avoid the brawl and the Brigitte abilities and set up a situation that I call free damage. I'm sure there's a better term for it, but in Overwatch, you can create situations where the enemy can't stop you, and as long as you continue to do that, you eventually just keep firing your unlimited ammo until they die. Soldier on the high ground, Pharah uncontested in the sky, things like this, right? Tracer can be one of those if you dodge well enough, and if she survives in the back, you can never touch her, and Brigitte can't efficiently keep flailing to keep her healing up. You simply will just do more damage than the enemy can heal, especially if Brigitte is used as one of the supports and not as a DPS. While we're still talking about mobility, let's mention my man Winston, which I think many assume is unplayable. He's not. It's just map dependent, similar to, I would say, Tracer as well. A lot of players and teams are going for the double sniper setup, which is definitely strong, and although you are always in threat of the enemy swapping to a Brigitte if they don't have one, if they don't and there's high ground to exploit, there's no better way to enable these off-meta DPS as well than Winston. Rein Zarya is really strong, but it requires your DPS oftentimes to go win duels by themselves, whereas anytime you can create a situation where you can just avoid the enemy brawl and go get other things that are on the high ground or in the backline or whatever, Winston does enable some of these other heroes to work by diving and especially blocking off the line of sight of Hanzo and Widow so that you can get your Tracer, Genji, Pharah, Doomfist, whatever, space in order to get in on those duels and take them out. Ideally, I would say you want to be diving and dueling DPS as a team, because once the enemy don't have a DPS, whether they have the best brawl comp in the world, most of your other DPS can outposition, outrange, and outmobility the brawl comp and eventually beat it. The brawl comp badly needs you to come in close and fight it, but if you take its ability away to deal damage, whatever that is, usually a Hanzo, right? After that point, using your own range damage or mobility DPS, it's not too difficult to win the fight after that point. All of this, of course, is made easier when the map is designed to allow you to do this. If you're playing King's Row, yeah, Winston's gonna be really hard, but maps that have a ton of high ground, Dorado, Gibraltar, Numbani, positioning is everything. Next up, I'll talk about Pharah. I did make an entire video on Pharah, so we won't elaborate too much on the Rocket Queen, but give a bit of an update of how things are going with her in the meta. I think it's beneficial to view her in a similar way that we do to Doomfist, as fitting into that mobility plus burst playstyle. Her damage doesn't care too much about armor, and when you're playing with a Pharah, note that it's all about the Pharah winning the duel against the enemy DPS. Why? Because that's the only thing that's going to contest them if they're running the meta standard Zarya Rein. We're definitely a strong duo in order to put down point presence, but they're not good at all at harassing range DPS. And ultimately, we're coming to a recurring theme here in that if you're playing for the brawl comp, it's to run over the enemy's front line, whereas a lot of these other DPS picks that I think are definitely good, the win condition is more about going at the enemy's DPS and possibly supports and kind of sweeping the rug out from under them, often by outpositioning the tanking presence they do have. To round out everything, we'll mention a few supports as well. Everybody always hates Lucio. They don't want to play Lucio, they don't think Lucio does anything, but much like some of the other characters mentioned on this list, oftentimes it's because Lucio's actually harder than people realize, between both the mechanics and the game sense to actually play him well. A lot of people play him as if he's Mercy, who just follows people around to heal them, whereas the plays that he makes are much more complicated than that and often require you to hold your speed boost in order either for some high value heals, healing multiple targets at once, but more often than not, the big value comes in the swift repositioning from speed amp, because especially if they're not running a Lucio on the enemy team, having speed amp enables for the mobility play that some of the other characters we mentioned earlier have latent in their kit just by having mobility options, but what Lucio speed does is give mobility to other characters as well. It breaks my heart oftentimes to see a Lucio Rein Zarya comp poke at the choke, expecting Lucio to heal them as effectively as like a Moira or something. No, use that speed boost to W mouse 1 into the enemy's backline to get that hammer swinging. And if that is your goal, I think the other support that we have to talk about is Moira. The Lucio-Moira combination is starting to see a resurgence in pro play as well. I would say Moira is already much more popular at the lower ranks of play, often because tank players just jump into damage constantly and you need a lot of healing to heal them anyway, but Lucio-Moira allows you to steamroll the enemy. Either you bully their front line or you rush past them, take out some of those squishier targets. The thing I would say about running either of these though, you need to play aggressive to get them active where they want to be fighting. Whereas if you do too much poke at the choke and don't really take the space that the speed and big burst of healing affords you, then Zen Mercy Hanzo will just have the range damage to kill you. But I think you'll find that you quite easily can overwhelm your opponents oftentimes. And just recently in pro play, there's a new comp that a lot of teams are running where it's a 3-3 brawl composition with 3 tanks and 3 supports, one of them being Brigitte, Lucio, Moira. Now that comp has failed miserably in the Overwatch League, I have to say. As it turns out, the top level widows that can click heads utterly destroy it, but I think you'll find in a lot of your matchmaking games, since you won't be playing against some of the best Hanzos and widows in the world, Lucio Moira is very effective right now if they don't have the skill shots to kill you. A couple other honorable mentions I want to say at the end here. Bastion is a character that you can swap to quite often because really D.Va is the best character to counteract him in order to buy time for your team to close the distance on him, whereas the Zarya off tank doesn't do too much. Because of this, you can lay down tons of damage into the Rein shield and break it, and as long as you don't die to the enemy Hanzo, Bastion can be really good. And then in general, a lot of the other DPS you want to keep in mind just based on the counter picks and how they're working out, right? Despite Hanzo being meta, if they have an enemy Pharah or Doomfist that's succeeding, you probably need a Mccree. Mei, although has quite low damage overall, because of the ground-based nature of a lot of the compositions, splitting off something and focus firing it down can win you teamfight after teamfight. She's looking a lot better right now. If I forgot to mention anybody and you have questions about them, you can go ahead and leave me a comment down below. If you enjoyed the video and you found it useful, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe because we upload each and every day, so you can want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link in the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and also recently I've invited some of our followers to come play with me. So if you want to get in on that, head over to Twitter. Be sure to follow. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.